My name is Isabella Viskupova, and I'm the founder of the Gentle Trauma Release Institute. In this class, I would love to tell you about fears and phobias and the optimal way to approach them in order to help our clients resolve them. Enjoy the class. A phobia is a fear of an overwhelming, intense nature. In fact, most people who suffer from a phobia refer to it as a fear of something, often not realizing that their fear actually qualifies as a phobia. Many of your clients, perhaps even yourself, might use the word fear when in reality, the defining features of a phobia are clearly in place. They are anxiety related to a specific source and avoidance behaviors. Let's now break down these two trademark features of phobias, aka fears. Phobias trigger intense feelings of anxiety. In fact, phobias belong to a group of disorders called anxiety disorders. The anxiety that in a phobia can often feel like a life or death situation is triggered when encountering or even thinking about the source of the phobia. This can be an object, for example, a needle, an animal, a spider or a snake, a feature of the environment, higher or elevated places, bodies of water, fire, or situations, social situations, driving, walking through a bridge. What is typical of phobias is that their source is often something that can and often does trigger at least mild fear in most people, but that fear is normally contained within a certain intensity and is manageable. For example, the sight of a spider might not be pleasant to many of us, and we might experience a sense of fear and or disgust. But in general, if we don't live in an area with deadly spiders, we would be able to say, look at the pictures of spiders or watch a documentary on spiders, albeit we might be watching with some discomfort and disgust. But with a phobia, the response to spiders would be way more intense than that. This could be recurring intrusive thoughts on spiders. You may overestimate the likelihood of having an encounter with a spider, both in time and space. Or when you actually see a spider, you would run out of the room. On a physical level, you might start sweating, shaking, shivering, trembling, feeling nauseated, lightheaded. You might feel like you're choking or about to have a heart attack. With phobias, we talk about disproportionate fear, disproportionate in the estimate of the danger that can result from the source of the phobia or from having an encounter with that spider, that needle, you name it, whatever the source of the phobia. It's a disproportionate fear compared to what the threat very likely is. Managing the anxiety is one of the biggest challenges of phobias because it can escalate quickly when encountering the source of the phobia, even if you just think about it. Furthermore, living with this anxiety in this fight or flight way of being, causing significant emotional distress, will sooner or later undermine one's overall well-being. Avoidance is another telltale sign of a phobia. And as you might know, avoidance is also a fairly common sign of trauma, where the person carrying trauma tends to avoid the so-called external or internal cues, popularly known as triggers that are linked to their trauma. For example, your client divorced her husband 10 or 20 years ago because there was infidelity on his side. This was traumatizing for a client because she felt utterly betrayed. Now, 10 or 20 years later, she is still avoiding places and environments where she could potentially meet her ex-husband because every time that happens after the divorce, it sends her to a downward spiral of extreme anger, extreme rage towards him that can last for weeks. In fact, she might only be able to manage these emotions via medication. because she doesn't have any other coping strategy. In that same sense, people who suffer from phobias will do what they can to avoid the source of their phobia. To give you another example of phobia-related avoidance behavior, this is one that goes with the picture on the slide. My daughter developed a fire phobia when she was around 5 or 6. And in practice, that would mean that she would get extremely anxious around any kind of fire. For example, when I was cooking and she would see the fire burning on the stove burners, she would run out of the kitchen out of fear that the whole house would catch fire. Later, she would just not come to the kitchen at all when she knew I was cooking. Or when we would go for a walk in the forest and say there was someone enjoying a campfire or barbecue in areas designated for these activities, we would have to get out of there immediately, as far as possible, usually just go home immediately, out of the forest as fast as possible. She would also get intrusive thoughts about how our home could catch fire. Intrusiveness is, in fact, another typical sign of trauma, which can display as recurring distressing thoughts about the trauma and the traumatic event, as well as flashbacks or nightmares. As you can see, right from the get-go, we can spot a connection between phobias and trauma. In fact, both PTSD and phobias belong to the same group of disorders, the one that I mentioned earlier on, called anxiety disorders. Organizing one's life around the phobia is another big challenge, along managing the constant anxiety. Avoidance behaviors, which can become a very limiting way of being, is the strategy that people suffering from phobias choose in order to cope, even if it means living in very constrictive ways. Sometimes it's not entirely possible to avoid the source of their fear, the source of the phobia, so they would endure it, but it is at the expense of terribly elevated levels of anxiety, emotional distress that can last for days or weeks, as well as exhaustion that can last for days or weeks. The most common mainstream ways of treating phobias are the following: exposure therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, and medication. I'm going to walk you through them one by one. The most common mainstream way of treating phobias is exposure therapy. It's based on the idea of gradual desensitization. In other words, gradual repeated exposure to the source of the phobia so that the person gradually habituates to that source of their phobia. The working premise is that by means of this gradual exposure, the phobia should eventually subside. For instance, if someone is afraid of bridges, walking or driving through bridges, exposure therapy might have them go from looking at photographs of bridges as such to thinking about getting on a bridge, then actually going near a bridge and eventually walking or driving through it. When it comes to mainstream approaches, exposure therapy is the approach yielding the best results, albeit this doesn't mean that the results are optimal. The problem with this approach is that it can take many sessions to get the phobia under control, and that can demotivate the client in the process, as they might simply not show up for all the sessions needed to get rid of the phobia. As well as with this approach, the results don't always last or are limited to a certain kind of the source of the phobia, say to a certain kind of bridges. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is another mainstream approach recommended to those who suffer from phobias. CBT is a form of talk therapy with the aim of helping the client change the way they think about the things that cause them emotional distress. This doesn't have to be just phobias. This is in general. This would be identifying and challenging the thoughts and beliefs that might be unrealistic, distorted, and generally unhelpful. The fancy term for this is cognitive reconstructing. In the instance of a phobia, the client would talk to the therapist about the object of their fear and the thoughts and beliefs around it. And the therapist would attempt to help the client challenge them, change them. The change of thoughts and beliefs about the source of distress and gaining control over those thoughts and beliefs should, according to cognitive behavioral therapy, lead to changes in the way we feel and respond. In other words, talking about the intense fear of, say, spiders that one has, and trying to change the thoughts and beliefs around spiders should lead to the elimination of the spider phobia. According to research, however, the results of cognitive reconstructing, and thus CBT as such, were not shown to be effective in eliminating phobias. And the same goes for medication that I would like to talk to you about just now. The medication typically prescribed for phobias are beta blockers, and I'll start with these ones, even though they're the least prevalent ones for phobias. This is medication typically used for high blood pressure. It blocks the hormone adrenaline, which is active in the fight and flight mode. And by blocking adrenaline, it can help to reduce elevated blood pressure, a racing heart, limbs that are shaking and shivering, or a trembling voice. Antidepressants are another kind of medication prescribed for phobias. And then finally, we have anti-anxiety medication or a sedative that help reduce anxiety fairly quickly. In fact, the probably most attractive feature of sedatives is that they kick in quickly compared to antidepressants, as an example. Benzodiazepines, popularly known as downers, belong to this category. So this would be your Valium or your Xanax. The problem with using medication for phobias is that the minute you stop taking your medication, you're back to square one. Plus, in the case of anti-anxiety medication, if you continue taking that medication, you'll develop a tolerance and you'll need higher and higher doses, thus risking becoming highly addictive to them. The good news is that mainstream therapy does now seem to see and acknowledge the link between phobias and traumatic events in a person's life. However, the problem in practice is that these traumatic events are not targeted during treatment in order to eliminate the phobia. Instead, mainstream approaches focus on stopping or limiting the avoidance behaviors of the client. Say someone suffers from a driving phobia, so instead of looking and clearing the traumatic event that triggered the phobia, maybe the person was in a car accident or they saw a terrible car accident happen in front of their eyes, the treatment would focus on how to make it so that they can sit in the car or drive a car again. In other words, finding the cause of the phobia becomes insignificant compared to fixing the avoidance behavior, such as never driving the car yourself or never ever sitting in a car driven by someone else. The mainstream approach to treating phobias thus seems to be not about looking at the root cause of the phobia and neutralizing that root cause, but about patching up the symptoms. In the GTR method, we practice a simpler approach with consistently long-lasting effects and results. We find the root cause of the phobia, in other words, a traumatic event or events that triggered that phobia, clear it out of the client's system, and when that happens, the phobia goes away. And the beauty of this is that more often than not, one session is quite enough to accomplish this. Here's an example of someone who used to have a driving phobia and who remembers exactly when it began.
happened several years ago. It was actually 2006, November 2006. And it was, I'd say about 7:30 in the evening, a dark, misty, rainy evening. And my daughter was working not far from where we live. And I live in kind of the country area, very narrow roads, no street lighting. And I was going to collect her, and my other son, who was 12 at the time, decided, I'll come with you, Mum. So we're driving down the road, and I could see the lights of a truck coming towards me. And I knew it was a truck because it was wider on the narrow road. And next thing, all of a sudden, right in front of the car, this man appeared as if out of nowhere. So my automatic reaction was, I can't go that way because here's the truck coming. The road isn't wide enough for me to pass him. I put my hand out in front of my son to save him because I was trying to jam on the brakes. And I just heard the bang, but it was more to the side of the car. So, of course, I stopped, and another car came down, which was a neighbour of mine behind me. She stopped. Your man was obviously drunk. He came out of the ditch. He was after jumping in the ditch, but the bang I was after hearing was off the mirror, the side mirror in the car. Mm-hmm. But to me, I had hit him, at that first bang. So needless to say, I was quite shaken, and my neighbour, he walked off and walked away and home. And as I said, very little lighting. So my neighbour said, I'll collect your daughter, go home. Mm-hmm. So when I did, and I went in and said it to my husband, he straight away went down to the man's house to check. He was gone off into bed, but he rang the guards to tell the guards and all that what had happened. And obviously, this has happened many times. People would come across him on the road. So the guard said, yeah, we know of him, haven't heard anything. It worked out. He was okay and everything. But for me, it was about 3 weeks later, and my sister asked me to drop her in town. She was having a night out with friends, and it was coming up to Christmas. This was December now, about 3 weeks later. And again, it was a misty, rainy night. Town busy. You can imagine everybody out for the Christmas. And I literally clung to the steering wheel. And I thought I would never get home. To the fact I was literally like that. So I got home, went in, relieved, but it was like just a sickness came over me, a tiredness. It was like as if I couldn't even move. I was that bad that I literally just had to go to bed. So from then, obviously, things eased off, but I never lost that fear, that gripping sensation to the steering wheel, especially at night. And in roads that I wouldn't be used to traveling on, I would avoid at all costs. I would let somebody else drive, or I wouldn't go if it was me that would have to drive. And a lot of the times, if I was going somewhere with my sisters, obviously one of them would drive and that. But it came about that I had just started this course. I just had watched the introductory videos at this stage and about the basic recipe. So my sister had rang me about our trip to Poland. We had to travel to Dublin, which is about a 2.5 to 3 hour drive from where I live, and to get the flight. So this was by day going up, but by night it was coming, our return was coming back. She couldn't drive, her husband needed the car, and my sister who's sick, obviously we weren't going to ask her to drive. So I thought, right, this is my opportunity to use it and to see how it goes. I'm very much open-minded. I didn't have an agenda of what way it was to turn out, or as I said, this was all new to me. So I did the basic recipe. And I have to say, I was amazed by how I felt. the easiness of just letting go. There was no drama around it. There was no tension of you must do this, you must do that, or whatever. You know, it was just basically the body simply relaxing into this, obviously the stimulation of the vagus nerve, to let the body know, I am okay. And you can do this. That happened then. It was an experience. You survived it. And it's now okay just to let go. And the very calming effect that I had to actually, when I got in the car to actually drive to Dublin, and especially if somebody else was with me, it would make me a lot more nervous. And travel to Dublin, I was literally in the car park of the hotel where we were leaving the car before I knew it. And normally, if I had to drive at night for the trip, I would have been thinking of that journey home. And it did not trouble me. Even if it did enter my head, I had no anxiety around it. I had no worry about it. I had no it playing in my mind and actually ruining my time away. And when we got off the flight and when we eventually came, during the flight, I would have been saying, oh my God, how am I going to get down the road now? And it's the lights coming towards me. It's like the lights of the truck coming towards me. And, you know, will I see obstacles before I stop? I had none of that. I literally had none of that. And we got into the car. And my sisters took us on a different road, first of all. Normally that would have really said, oh, this is the start of it. Never troubled me, never bothered me, never. I just turned around and we ended up now in an industrial estate or some lonely place. Got back onto the M50 and we came upon roadworks where there was all flashing lights to detour us. Not a bother to me. It didn't even affect me. I just went ahead with the detour, even though I knew I didn't know this road. I was not affected. It was nighttime. There was a lot of trucks on that road, mainly more than cars. It was big trucks and never bothered me. Even to the fact the tunnel was closed here in Cork, which would have been the shortest route to drop my sister home. I dropped one first and dropped the other. So it took us all in town and around. And I have to say, I actually got in home. Normally, I'd have to calm myself. And this had happened to me again only in August, where I had another trip at night time. And I was completely, by the time I arrived to the destination, this time, I was fine. I put on the kettle, made a mint tea for myself while I was cleaning my face and doing whatever. And this was 2:15 in the morning. And I went into bed and I just said, thank you, Isabella. Thank you, gentle trauma, because I would have been in a different state. Even after arriving at my destination, I would have had to do a calming of that anxiety that I would have had within me. And instead, I was completely calm. And I actually thought, Jean, you drove to Dublin, you went to Poland, you came back, and you, after the flights and everything else, and you drove that road for 3 hours.
We've said that a simple, elegant way of helping clients get rid of their phobias is finding the traumatic events that triggered them, then de-traumatizing the client's system by clearing those traumatic memories and targeting the root cause of the phobia. Looking at it from the other end, what are the common traps in approaching phobias? Well, the first one would be not targeting the root cause. And the second one would be using a conversational approach rather than a body-oriented approach. I'll tell you more about these two instances. Let me offer you a personal example here. I used to suffer from dental phobia. I didn't always have it. I do remember times when I didn't have it, and I know exactly when and how that phobia started. I remember the exact situation. I was about maybe 7 or 8. I went to the dentist. At the time, local anesthetics were not used in dentistry in my country of origin. The dentist, who appeared to be a sweet lady, was about to start drilling. Because I never experienced drilling, I asked her if it would hurt. And with the sweetest smile, she replied, "No, not at all." You can imagine that that was not what happened. Just seconds after being reassured by this sweet lady, the pain hit full force, and I was in utter shock. I did my best to get a hang of my dental phobia over the years, but until I de-traumatized this specific memory, I had little results to show for. No matter how much I tried to rationalize and say to myself that it was just one bad experience or that not all dentists are like that, the phobia was still there. No amount of cognitive reconstructing changed that. I would still feel cold sweat running down my spine, even if I happened to spot a billboard promoting a new toothpaste and there would be teeth featured on that billboard photograph. I really needed to tackle the original traumatic event behind my phobia before I could see it change for the better. The second trap in approaching phobia is not using a body-oriented approach. In the GTR method, we operate on the premise that trauma is a bodily response to threat, and therefore, releasing trauma from the system has to actively engage the body, and it has to engage the body in a specific way. In the gentle trauma release method, we do this through our healing protocols. You simply cannot talk someone out of trauma because it's stuck in the body. And phobia is, in essence, trauma. Therefore, a conversational approach will not be enough to get rid of a phobia for good. Changing your beliefs and thoughts around the phobia will not turn off the fight, flight, freeze response because it's a natural response of your body where the body essentially thinks that this threat is still out there to get you. If you feel like you're being chased by a tiger, no amount of talking will cause you to stop from running and stop being afraid. What's needed is a direct communication channel to the body in a way that helps it understand that it's safe. And this typically doesn't happen through asking the client to be rational or to look at things from a bigger perspective. Not when it comes to phobias anyway, because they trigger a survival response of fight, flight, or freeze. And therefore, your body feels like it's a matter of life or death. What does it look like in practice when a phobia goes away? Well, first of all, when you encounter the source of your phobia, it won't feel like it's a life or death situation. The anxiety around that source of phobia will go away or be significantly reduced. For example, with my dental phobia, I used to be so afraid of the dentist and just dentistry in general that I could hear the drill, any kind of drill, not just the dentist drill, and I would immediately feel cold sweat on my forehead and my back, my heart pounding, my breath getting faster and faster, and me feeling like I'm about to get eaten by a lion any moment. And mind you, this could be workers doing some work and drilling into concrete outside my window. It didn't have to be a dentist drill. And you can imagine actually sitting in that dentist chair. I felt like I was about to perish in it. What changed after I cleared the phobia? Well, I still don't like going to the dentist, as probably most people, it's not fun to sit in that chair, but I don't panic when I go for my checkups. I tolerate it with relative ease. The sound of the drill does nothing to me anymore, whether it's the workers outside drilling into concrete or hearing the drill in the waiting room at the dentist when another patient is in, which with the phobia in place, this was extremely anxiety provoking. Or say when my dentist is cleaning my teeth, which can also produce this high pitch sound similar to the drill. When I see photographs of teeth or 3D models of teeth, I can now look at them with calm. I'm actually fascinated and intrigued by dentistry, as well as genuinely thankful for its existence. And it becomes easy for me now to focus on those thoughts when I'm sitting in that chair, rather than having intrusive thoughts about a terrible pain about to hit me any moment, or disappearing into the afterlife as a result of that experience. Going back to my daughter's phobia, we got rid of that fire phobia through GTR. And so today she maintains a natural respect of fire in a healthy way, but she loves candles. She loves preparing a meal for herself on the stove. She loves bonfires and roasting marshmallows. In other words, the avoidance behaviors stopped. And of course, the intrusive thoughts about our house catching fire and us burning in it stopped as well. Going back to the root cause idea, rather than me trying to gradually expose my daughter to different kinds of fire, as exposure therapy would have her do, say showing her photographs of fire, then lighting little candles, etc., so that she would stop being afraid of fire. Rather than doing that, we identified the core traumatic event when that phobia started and cleared that memory. And that immediately led to her phobia going away. In her case, one day they had a fire drill at school. It was the first time that she experienced this kind of drill, and she had that phobia ever since. I imagine that the presentation was done in an anxiety-provoking way, or it could be simply that it was then and there that she realized for the first time that one could die trapped in a building or a room and die by burning alive in it. Naturally, a shocker for a child. Let's now look at another example from the GTR practice, this time one involving the phobia of vomiting, which, believe it or not, is not completely rare. This case study involves a boy who used to suffer from this phobia. And just for clarification, the phobia of vomiting, or this extreme fear of vomiting, leads to avoidance behaviors where the person will avoid places where they vomited previously or where they could vomit. They often start avoiding eating in public altogether, but not out of fear of being judged or pressured around their eating habits or choices, which would be the case of the phobia of eating in public, but rather because of the fear that they could vomit again. They can also stop eating certain foods altogether, be it in public or in private. They usually start avoiding social situations. Say, if it's a child, they can stop going to parties or school trips. And this is because all these situations and environments cause them to feel high levels of anxiety as a result of that particular phobia. Let's now see how this phobia played out in the life of a 9-year-old boy.
I was approached by one of my clients about her little boy. He's a 9-year-old boy, and he had developed this phobia of eating in public. Not so much of food, but eating in public. And what had happened was he was in school, in class, and he vomited in the classroom. And he said that it didn't hit him that day. It was the next day he thought about it, and he started feeling anxious and worried and nervous. And so it just started snowballing. And so the parents ended up taking him to the hospital. And they examined him, and the doctors told the mom, oh, he's fine. This is very common in children. And so the child, as he walked out, the mother told me, he said, so mommy, you're telling me this is all in my head? So in the meantime, she had reached out and said, you've done GTR with me. Do you think it's possible you can do it with my son? And I said, well, let me find out. And that's when I reached out to you, and you said, absolutely. And we did. So that was August the 3rd. I had my first session with this little boy. And he's this bright little boy, very open, very intelligent. And so we identified the traumatic event, which was the vomiting in his classroom. But that day he said he didn't think about it, which makes me, I believe that, I guess he was in shock, or he disassociated from that event. But he thought about it the next day. And then after that, he said, I've become nervous about eating in public because I'm afraid I'm going to throw up. We did the basic recipe. And we did, I believe we did 3 rounds of the basic recipe. So that was August 3rd. And then, put my glasses on, August 12th was our second session, and he was getting better. He was feeling more comfortable. By our 3rd GTR session, which was August 24th, he was out with his grandmother and aunts and cousins, and they went into in the city square. And he had a little bit of a biscuit in public. And his grandmother noticed and said, oh my goodness, you're eating a biscuit. And so it slowly started progressing from there. By the 4th GTR session, he said to me, I don't even think about it anymore. I'm cooking hamburgers for my mom and dad. I'm eating this, I'm eating that. And so it was just amazing to witness this simple, gentle trauma release method, the simplicity of it, how it helped this little boy. And 2 weeks ago I thought it was my last session with him, because we dealt with the eating phobia, because now he wants to take cooking class, he wants to make bread, he wants to make noodles. The end of the session, he had a bowl of, I don't know what he was eating. I don't want to ever make a big deal saying, oh, look, you're eating. It's just eating away, just talking about all of that. And so I thought that was my final session. So that was done. So now he was picked up. There was a mix-up at school. His grandfather was supposed to pick him up. And apparently there's so many gates at the school, and the grandfather got mixed up. So the child now is afraid of being left at school. So I'm meeting with him Thursday, and we're going to do some GTR. He asked his mom, can I meet with Katie? They call me Katie. Can I meet with Katie? I want to work on being a little confused at school about the gates.
It's wonderful that he trusts you so much that he realizes he has a problem, that it needs to be worked on, healed, and he goes to you.
Yes, I was just so amazed. I was so amazed. And if this doesn't make anybody a believer, I don't know what does, because I have witnessed it. And yeah.
You shared with me also that apart from the phobia of vomiting, he also stopped eating, that he didn't want to eat after that.
He didn't want to eat. Yeah, he was afraid. It became this. He had to prepare himself, the anxiety before eating in public. What if I vomit? What if I vomit? I know after the first session, the parents took him to this amusement park, and he was in the car, upset. Oh, I'm going to go out. What if I eat? Let's eat in the car. so I won't eat in public in case I vomit. And so he did the basic recipe in the car. This was his dad now saying, okay, do that thing they told you to do. And he was doing that, and he was able to go out, and they had a good day. So, I mean, I have all these emails from his mother, thanking me, and so grateful for this program, that he's doing really well. And he had his first communion last Sunday, and he was able to go to confession without feeling anxious. So I feel like the mother said, I guess he's a very sensitive boy, and he is. But I think this is like, what great building blocks for this little boy to have this tool. And so when he feels like this, that this is what he can do. So this is wonderful.
I was so looking forward to bringing you this class on fears and phobias, because there really is a lot of good, hopeful news when it comes to healing them, even within the framework of a coaching practice. And part of that great news is that clearing phobias is a relatively fast endeavor leading to long-lasting results if you use the right approach based on the two premises that we mentioned: targeting the root cause, i.e. a traumatic event, and using a body-oriented approach. The unexpected surprise in all this is that not only is it possible to clear phobias, but what we often see in the gentle trauma release method is that the client often goes above and beyond just clearing the phobia itself. What we have found is that GTR helps clients heal phobias, but the client also ends up feeling more optimistic, confident about themselves and their life in general and across the board. The likely explanation is that conquering their phobia, in other words, a big fear that they have been carrying for a long time and that was constricting their life experience, gave them a natural boost in confidence. This feeling of, if I conquered this, I can do anything. Think of the little boy with the phobia of vomiting from the previous example, who didn't just go back to eating in public and eating the way he used to prior his phobia. He actually started cooking for the whole family so that everybody could enjoy food together, perhaps deepening his sense of enjoyment of both food and interpersonal connections. Isn't that a wonderful way to heal? This is Isabella Viskupova from the Gentle Trauma Release Institute, and I hope you enjoyed this class. Until we connect again, bye.